Yeah, this is what the tube looks like before I flock it. You can see it's actually kind of a gray inside there and not very dark. We have to remove the focuser assembly, the spider, which is in this case a molded into the front piece. We have to remove the primary mirror and all of the nuts and bolts on the interior. Because of how this telescope is designed and the fact that I can't get my hands inside the spider, I'm going to start by removing the mirror cell. There's 3 screws here on the rear of the mirror cell which hold it in place. A Ziploc baggie that's labeled is perfect for keeping all the little parts. 2 little pieces of tape are all you need to ensure that you put it back in the same orientation as it came out. And there's the mirror cell in one piece. Now, after taking the mirror cell out, putting it away in a safe place where it can't get damaged or anything, it's time to go ahead and take the rest of the pieces off. Don't forget a baggie for putting all your little bits in as you take them off. Now, on my 6-inch scope, before I took this rear plate off, I used 2 pieces of tape again to make sure that it went back in the same orientation. With the Celestron and this plate here, it can only go in one direction, so I don't need the tape. Okay, now that the screws are all out, tight fit. And the plastic end cap comes off. I flocked my 6-inch telescope first because it was pretty straightforward coming apart. So this is going to be a learn as I go on this one. I've got 3 bolts holding in the focusing mechanism, but it looks like they're attached on top of the cap, which is affixed, which also holds the secondary spider. So I'm going to attack this as taking the focuser off first. Biggest reason I took that rear plate off first was so I could get my arm up inside here to hold the nuts as I remove these bolts from the focuser. do have to be careful reaching up inside here, because my hand that's inside is right next to the secondary mirror. And I do not want to drop anything on that secondary mirror. This is the last bolt for the focuser. And I can tell this is going to be somewhat of a juggling act. So I need to make an adjustment here. Get that focuser more on a level plane. It should lift straight out. And there it is. Okay, and now for the last bits on this. I can actually turn this. I can get my fingers in this far. Just go slow. Make sure you don't drop any bits or pieces on your secondary mirror. Okay, the last of the screws are out there. Now it's time to work this off. I'm assuming, yes, it's as tight a fit as the rear cap was. Being extra careful because the secondary mirror is still attached there. And there we have the entire piece. Now we get to see the entire inside of the tube without any of its added bits. The only thing you need to do now is with a dry cloth, just wipe the dust out. I'd seen a recommendation to clean the inside of the tube with rubbing or denatured alcohol, but the manufacturer of my flocking says not to, as it can soften the paint on the inside. Now this is just a small piece of the flocking material. As you can tell, it's quite dark. There's a little bit of lint on it that'll come off once we get it in there. And the back has, it's got a glue back. You just peel and stick. I bought enough of this material to flock the entire insides of my 6-inch telescope and the 114 here, including delivery, for less than $30. So, and I can really tell the difference on my 6-inch scope, so I'm looking forward to it here. I'm going to turn this over like this so you can see it better. But when the material goes inside, and I'm going to be cutting mine into smaller strips, the manufacturer recommends that you leave about a 1/2 inch out on each end. Now I paid real close attention on this scope when I took the front piece and rear piece off. I followed the directions on my 6-inch scope, but because the end caps fit inside the tube when it's assembled, I actually had to go back and cut a 1/4 inch out all the way around. With this scope, I can go all the way to the edge. So when I put it in, I'll leave it hanging over and then trim the edges off all at one time. When you order your flocking material, don't just take the mirror diameter and multiply it by pi, because depending upon your telescope, you're going to have a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch difference between the outer edge of the mirror and the telescope tube itself. Easiest way is just take a measuring tape, roll it around and measure out how much you need. I need 18 inches, and that's being generous on it. Don't skimp on measuring your flocking. It's better to have a little extra than to be too short. When you get your flocking, it comes rolled in a tube. I've got a large sheet of it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this in 1-1.5 inch strips, maybe as large as 2, to give me a small enough piece to work with as I put it down through the tube. With the 6-inch tube being larger, of course, I was able to go to I cut my strips between 2 and 3 inches in width and put them in. A box cutter with a fresh blade in it is excellent for cutting the flocking material down to size. You might be tempted when you put your first piece of flocking in to try and line it right on the edge of this lip that runs down where the tube assembly was put together. But by doing that, what you might end up doing is ending up right on the lip with your last piece, either making it harder to get a good fit with the first piece or leaving a small gap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my first piece centered on that seam. I peel down just the first little bit. Reach through. Press it down on the end. And holding it up away from the tube, I can bring it in straight and flat. manufacturer says there's no problem with a little bit of overlap. Okay, what do you do when you get to the opening for the optical sight? Nothing. Just go right over it. What we're going to do later is we're going to cut out the openings using an X-Acto knife. I think you can tell already how much darker it's getting in there. All I've done is rotated the tube in the rings in order to give myself a easier surface to work on going down instead of trying to work my way around the top. Save these extra bits, you can use them later. Like I said, right over the opening for the focuser assembly. And here's the last strip going down. And the tube is flocked. Now it's time for cleanup. You pick yourself a spot. And using a razor knife, you can easily just trim the excess off. One thing with the way that I laid this in strips, if you lay it in big pieces, the manufacturer says that you need to score lines on it to take care of any expansion and contraction due to heat and weather. Now, the best tool for opening up all our little holes is an X-Acto knife. Just before you go to cut the holes through, rub your fingers along there to make sure that it's nice and tight, and make sure your fingers aren't in the way so you don't cut yourself. Okay, now it's time to reassemble. Before putting that back together, use either lint roller, lint brush, or I used packing tape, wrap it around my hand and pat down and get any extra fibers out of there that may be left over. Again, we've got our secondary mirror still attached here, so you want to be careful. Put this on. And it should line right up. Once again, your hand is right down there at that secondary mirror. So you want to be very careful. I'm getting ready to put the rear plate on, which holds the primary cell. I've been debating, I've seen a couple modifications where people have kept this one piece off. What that does for you is that permits you, by removing that, that permits you to move the tube much more forward if you need to balance it. If you're going to do that, you need to think about it before you cut out the bolt hole for the flocking. Now, if you haven't put a center dot on your mirror, if it came without one, now that you've got the mirror out, before you put it back in, now's the time to put that center dot on the mirror. Now, all we have to do to know that we're putting the mirror back in the same orientation is match up those two pieces of tape that we had earlier. Now the last little bit of the assembly is screwing in the primary cell, and it's all back together. The last thing we have to do is collimate the telescope. Finally, one last look inside the telescope now that we've got it flocked. And I think you'll agree that it's much darker inside there.